I am going to read to you right now a short story by David Sedaris from his collection, Holidays on Ice. Christmas means giving. For the first 12 years of our marriage, Beth and I happily set the neighborhood standard for comfort and luxury. It was an established fact that we were brighter and more successful, but the community seemed to accept our superiority without much complaint, and life flowed on the way it should. I used to own a hedge polisher, an electric shovel, and 3 Rolex gas grills that stood side by side in the backyard. One was for chicken, one for beef, and the third I had specially equipped to steam the oriental pancakes we were always so fond of. When the holidays rolled around, I used to rent a moving van and drive into the city, snatching up every bright new extravagance that caught my eye. Our twin sons, Taylor and Weston, could always count on the latest electronic toy or a piece of sporting equipment. Beth might receive a riding vacuum cleaner or a couple pairs of fur-lined jeans, and those were just the stocking stuffers. There were disposable boats, ultra-suede basketballs, pewter knapsacks, and solar-powered card shufflers. I'd buy them shoes and clothes and bucketfuls of jewelry from the finest boutiques and department stores. Far be it from me to snoop around for a bargain or discount. I always paid top dollar, thinking that those foot-long price tags really meant something about Christmas. After opening our gifts, we'd sit down to a sumptuous banquet, feasting on every imaginable variety of meat and pudding. When one of us got full and felt uncomfortable, we'd stick a silver wand down our throats, throw up, and start eating all over again. In effect, we weren't much different from anyone else. Christmas was a season of bounty, and to the outside world, we were just about the most bountiful people anyone could think of. We thought we were happy, but that all changed on one crisp Thanksgiving day shortly after the Cottinghams arrived. If my memory serves me correctly, the Cottinghams were trouble from the very first moment they moved in next door. Doug, Nancy, and their unattractive 8-year-old daughter, Eileen, were exceedingly envious and greedy people. Their place was a little smaller than ours, but it made sense seeing as there were 4 of us and only 3 of them. Still, though, something about the size of our house so bothered them that they hadn't even unpacked the first suitcase before starting construction on an indoor skating rink and a 3,000-square-foot pavilion where Doug could show off his collection of pre-Columbian sofa beds. Because we felt like doing so, Beth and I then began construction on an indoor soccer field and a 5,000-square-foot rotunda where I could comfortably display my collection of pre-Columbian sofa beds. Doug would tell all the neighbors I'd stolen the idea from him, but I'd been thinking about pre-Columbian sofa beds long before the Cottinghams pulled into town. They just had to cause trouble no matter what the cost. When Beth and I built a 7-screen multiplex theater, they had to go and build themselves a 12-screener. This went on, and to make a long story short, within a year's time, neither one of us had much of a yard. The 2 houses now butted right up against each other, and we blocked out the west side windows so that we wouldn't have to look into their gaudy fitness center or 2nd-story rifle range. Despite their competitive nature, Beth and I tried our best to be neighborly and occasionally invite them over for rooftop barbecues and so forth. I'd attempt to make adult conversation, saying something like, "I just paid $8,000 for a pair of sandals that don't even fit me." Doug would counter, saying that he himself had just paid $10,000 for a single flip-flop he wouldn't even wear if it did fit him. He was always very combative that way. If it cost you $70,000 to have a cavity filled, you could bet your boots it cost him at least $125,000. I suffered his company for the better part of a year until one November evening when we got into a spat over which family sent out the most meaningful Christmas card. Beth and I normally hired a noted photographer to snap a portrait of the entire family surrounded by the gifts we had received the year before. Inside the card would be the price of these gifts along with the message, "Christmas means giving." The Cottinghams favored their card, which consisted of a Xeroxed copy of Doug and Nancy's stock portfolio. I said that while it is all very well and good to have money, their card said nothing about the way they spent money. Like our card said, Christmas means giving, and even if he were to gussy up his stock report with a couple of press-on candy canes, it would still fail to send the proper holiday message. The conversation grew quite heated, and some punches were thrown between the wives. We'd all had a few drinks, and by the time the Cottinghams left our house, it was generally assumed that our friendship was over. I dwelled upon the incident for a day or two, and then turned my attention toward the approaching holidays. We just finished another of our gut-busting Thanksgiving dinners, and Beth, the boys, and I were watching a bullfight on TV. We could watch whatever we wanted back then because we still had our satellite dish. Juan Carlos Ponce de Velasquez had just been gored something fierce, and we were all acting pretty excited about it when the doorbell rang. I figured one of the boys had ordered a pizza and opened the door, surprised to find a foul-smelling beggar. He was a thin, barefooted man with pepperoni-sized scabs on his legs and an unkempt beard smeared with several different varieties of jam. I sensed it was the jam we'd thrown into the garbage the night before, and one look at our overturned trash can told me I was right. This had me pretty ticked off, but before I could say anything about it, the old bum pulled out a coffee mug and started whining for money. When Beth asked who was at the door, I called out Code Blue, which was our secret signal that one of us should release the hounds. We had two of them back then, big Dobermans named Butterscotch and Mr. Lewis. Beth tried to summon them from the dining room, but having gorged themselves on turkey and stuffing, it was all they could do to lift their heads and vomit. Seeing as they were laid up, I got down on my hands and knees and bit the guy myself. Maybe it was the bullfight, but for whatever reason, I had a sudden taste for blood. My teeth barely broke the skin, but that was all it took to send the old coot hobbling over to the Cottingham's place. I watched him pound open upon their door, knowing full well what would happen when he told competitive Doug Copycat that I'd given him one measly bite on the calf. Beth called me into the house for one reason or another, and when I returned to the door a few minutes later, I saw Helvetica, the Cottingham's maid, taking a photograph of Doug, Nancy, and Eileen, handing the tramp a $1 bill. I knew something was up, and sure enough, 2 weeks later I had come to find that exact same snapshot on the Cottingham's Christmas card, along with the words, "Christmas means giving." That had always been our slogan, and here he'd stolen it, twisting the message in an attempt to make us appear selfish. It had never been our way to give to others, but I started having second thoughts, and when I noticed the phenomenal response the Cottinghams received on the basis of their Christmas card, suddenly they were all anyone was talking about. Walk into any holiday party and you'd hear, "Did you see it? I think it's positively enchanting. Here, these people donated money to an absolute stranger. Can you beat that? A whole $1 they gave to this vagrant person with absolutely nothing to his name. If you ask me, those Cottinghams are a couple of very brave and generous people." Doug would probably say that I unfairly stole his idea when I myself became a generous person, but this was not the case. I'd been thinking of being a generous person long before he showed up on the scene, and besides that, if he could illegally pinch my holiday slogan, why couldn't I casually borrow a concept that had been around for a good 10 years? When I first told people that I had given $2 to the Inner City Headache Fund, they turned away as if they didn't believe me. Then I actually did give $2 to the Headache Fund, and boy, did things ever change once I started flashing around that cancelled check. Generosity can actually make people feel quite uncomfortable if you talk about it enough. I don't mean the bad, boring uncomfortable, but something much richer. If practiced correctly, generosity can induce feelings of shame, inadequacy, and even envy, to name just a few. The most important thing is that you keep some written or visual proof of your donation. Otherwise, there's really no point in giving to charity. Doug Cottingham would say I took that line from him, but I'm pretty sure I read it in a tax manual. I carried my cancelled check to all the important holiday parties, but people lost interest shortly after New Year's Eve. The seasons passed, and I forgot all about my generosity until the following Thanksgiving, when the old tramp returned to our neighborhood. He must have remembered the previous year's bite to the leg, and as a result, he was just about to pass us by when we called him in for a good dose of benevolence. First, we videotaped him eating a palmful of leftover stuffing, and then I had Beth snap a picture as I handed the geezer a VCR. It was an old top-loading Betamax, but put a new cord on it and I'm sure it would have worked just fine. We watched then as he strapped it on his back and headed next door to continue his begging. The sight of that VCR was all it took for that skunk Doug Cottingham, who stepped into his house and returned to present the old codger with an 8-track tape deck, and once again their maid was on hand to take a picture of it. We then called the tramp over to our house and gave him a year-old blow-dryer. The Cottinghams responded with the toaster oven. Within an hour, we had advanced to pool tables and stairmasters. Doug gave him a golf cart, and I gave him my satellite dish. This accelerated until any fool could see exactly where it was heading. Handing over the keys to his custom-built motorized travel sauna, Doug Cottingham gave me a look that seemed to say, "Top that, neighbor." Beth and I had seen that look before, and we hated it. We could have easily topped his travel sauna, but we were running low on film and thought it best to cut to the chase. Why needlessly escalate when we all knew what was most important? After a brief conference, Beth and I called the tramp back over and asked which he liked better, young boys or young girls. Much to our delight, he said that girls were too much of a headache, but that he'd have some fun with boys before his last visit to our local state penitentiary. That said, we gave him our 10-year-old sons, Taylor and Weston. Top that, neighbor! You should have seen the look on Doug Cottingham's face. That year's Christmas card was the most meaningful to date. It pictured our son's tearful goodbye, along with the message, "Christmas means giving until it hurts." We were the toast of the neighborhood that holiday season, back on top where we belonged. Beth and I were the couple to have any cocktail party or informal tree trimming. Where are those super generous people with that delightful Christmas card? Someone would ask, and the host would point in our direction while the Cottinghams bitterly gritted their teeth. As a last-ditch effort to better their names, they donated their horse-faced daughter, Eileen, to a crew of needy pirates, but anyone in the know could see it as the desperate gesture it really was. Once again, we were the ones everyone wanted to be with, and the warm glow of their admiration carried us through the holiday season. We received a second helping of awe early the following summer when the boys were discovered dead in what used to be Doug Cottingham's motorized travel sauna. The neighbors all wanted to send flowers, but we said we'd prefer them to make a donation in our name to the National Sauna Advisory Board or to the Sex Offenders Defense Fund. This was a good move, and soon we had established ourselves as Christ-like. The Cottinghams were, of course, furious and immediately set to work on their tired game of one-upsmanship. It was most likely the only thing they thought about, but we didn't lose any sleep over it. For that year's holiday cards, we had settled on the theme, Christmas means giving until it bleeds. Shortly after Thanksgiving, Beth and I had visited our local blood bank where we nearly drained our body's precious accounts. Pale and dizzy from our efforts, it was all we could do to lift a hand and wave to one another from our respective gurneys. We recovered in time and were just sealing our envelopes when the postman delivered our neighbor's holiday card, which read, Christmas means giving of yourself. The cover pictured Doug lying outstretched upon an operating table as a team of surgeons busily, studiously removed his glistening Cottingham lung. Inside the card was a photograph of the organ's recipient, a haggard coal miner holding a sign that read, Douglas Cottingham saved my life. How dare he? Beth and I had practically invented the theme of medical generosity, and it drove us mad, that smug, superior expression seeping from beneath our neighbor's surgical mask. Any long-married couple can, in times of crisis, communicate without speaking. This fact was illustrated as my wife and I wordlessly leapt into action. Throwing down her half-sealed envelope, Beth called the hospital, while I contacted a photographer from our car phone. Arrangements were made, and before the night was over, I had donated both of my eyes, a lung, one of my kidneys, and several important veins surrounding my heart. Having an unnatural attachment to her internal organs, Beth surrendered her scalp, her teeth, her right leg, and both breasts. It wasn't until after her surgery that we realized my wife's contributions were non-transferable, but by that time, it was too late to sew them back on. She gave the scalp to a startled cancer patient, made a keepsake necklace of her teeth, and brought the leg and breasts to the animal shelter, where they were hand-fed to a litter of starving border collies. That made the local evening news, and once again the Cottinghams were green with envy over our good fortune. Donating organs to humans was one thing, but the community went wild over what Beth had done for those poor, abandoned puppies. At each and every holiday party, our hosts would beg my wife to shake their dog's hand or pass a blessing over the shell of their ailing tortoise. The coal mining recipient of Doug Cottingham's lung had died when his cigarette set fire to the sheets and bandages covering his chest, and now the name was practically worthless. We were at the Hepplewhites' Christmas Eve party when I overheard Beth whisper that Doug Cottingham couldn't even donate a decent lung. She laughed then long and hard, and I placed my hand upon her shoulder, feeling the gentle bite of her keepsake necklace. I was no doubt drawing a good deal of attention myself, but this was Beth's night, and I gave it to her freely because I was such a generous person. We were a team, she and I, and while I couldn't see the way people were looking at us, I could feel it just as surely as I sensed the warmth cast off by the Hepplewhites' roaring fire. There would be other Christmases, but I think Beth and I both knew that this one was special. In a year's time, we would give away the house, our money, and what remained of our possessions. After scouting around for the right neighborhood, we would move into a village of cardboard boxes located beneath the Ragsdale Cloverleaf. The Cottinghams, true to their nature, would move into a smaller box next door. The begging would go relatively well during the holiday season, but come deep winter, things would get hard, and we'd be visited by wave after wave of sorrow and disease. Beth would die after a long and sad struggle with tuberculosis, but not until after Doug Cottingham and his wife had been killed by pneumonia. I tried not to let it bother me, but they had died first, that they had died first, but in truth I would have a very difficult time dealing with it. Whenever my jealousy would get the best of me, I would reflect back upon that perfect Christmas Eve at the Hepplewhites. Shuddering beneath my blanket of damp newspapers, I tried to recall the comforting sound of Beth's carefree laughter and picture her raw head thrown back in merriment, those bright, gleaming gums reflecting the light of a crystal chandelier. With luck, the memory of our love and generosity would lull me toward a profound and heavy sleep that would last until morning.